board. It's been something that we wanted to have happen for a long time. So this is our first real board meeting, which is cool. As you know, it's taken us a long time to get there, and I'm not going to rehash all of that, but I appreciate all of you who have held in there as long as you have, and the new people that we have joining us, Haley and Peter. And I want to, we're going to continue to work on onboarding both at today's meeting as well as an upcoming meeting we have in September. We're going to do that one in person. So, and then we're also continuing our search for 2 additional members of the board. We hope to have those folks ready for land board approval by October. And we're looking for some tribal interests and still looking for some timber interest. And Brett can expand on that as we need to. And as you know, the oversight structure we adopted by the land board in April for the Elliott describes roles and duties of the board. So do familiarize yourself with that document. Originally, you were supposed to be a board in statute, and that didn't happen. So we did the next best thing, which was have the land board approve that constitution of the board. Let us know what information you want or need as part of your onboarding. I know you all had to go through the background check process, and that can be a pain, especially when you've done it for another agency recently, but apparently all agencies do it differently. So I appreciate your time on that. And just know that you are a critical part. You've always been a critical part to creating the Elliott State Research Forest. And I couldn't be more happy to see you all today in that capacity. And I look forward to going to Coos Bay tomorrow and seeing what folks have to say while we're there. So I will see those of you in person at that one. And I'll turn it over to you, Brett, unless we have any questions.
Thanks, Vicki, and hi, everybody. I'm Brett Brownscombe. I work for DSL as the transition director for the Elliott State Forest and transitioning into the research forest. So what I thought we could do here, now that I have my technology worked out and I'm fully seated in the DSL, the friendly DSL confines bill, right next to Bill, but not on the Grand Ronde River, in a sterile DSL office building in Salem, not on the banks of the Grand Ronde like Bill. He and I can see each other every now and again. What I thought we could do is just introductions, and then I'll put the agenda up for just one quick check with you all and then get going. But I think first and foremost, like Vicki said, thank you to you all for making time today. This is our initial board meeting, and we are still gearing up and getting, you all backgrounded, as well as for the first time moving into the formal official Elliott State Research Forest Board process. And so there's a lot to talk about today. But then there's also the planning for the next steps in the in-person meeting, where we'll get our feet under us more. And we want to work with you all in hearing and figuring out what's most helpful to you as board members while we grow this board from 6 to 9. So we will have a conversation about what you all think as to additional board composition that's on the agenda. But first and foremost, why don't we just do intros? We're all in the same boat here. Some of us have maybe been in the boat a little longer than others, but I don't think anybody here has been fully absent, in the sense that I think everyone here has been tracking and staying close to the Elliott and its transition through the meanders of the variety of channels through time here. So I don't think anybody's truly a rookie, but we want to do what we can at DSL to build rapport amongst you all as you come together as the official board for the forest, the research forest. And virtual meetings are not the best way to do that. So we recognize that, and that's why September is in person. But why don't we do intros? And I tried to think over the weekend about a great icebreaker intro. And if anybody has anything they'd rather do than this, just do it. I hope the whole idea is to let folks know who may not know you personally a little tidbit about yourselves, and what you think makes you interesting and unique, or might be of interest to other people on the board that you're now working with and getting to know. And so, I was thinking of, okay, and the idea is to do this not without reciting the autobiography about you or whatever has or hasn't been written, but a tidbit after you introduce, your name, where you live. If you could talk a bit about your background and connection to the Elliott, and then top it off with take your pick, either your favorite concert, or if you had time to read a book, what would the book be and why? Or choose your own adventure, a little tidbit about you that you think others might find interesting. So why don't we do that? And boy, who to choose? I guess we can just go alphabetically. And I think that means you, Melissa Crivens. Are you there? Or maybe I'll proceed more.
No, I got it. I was trying desperately to unmute. Sorry about
Okay,
that.
I was about to take the reverse route and come back. Thank you.
When
And
you
how
said
are you? It's good to
alphabetically, I
hear
was
you.
thinking first name or last name. Good to hear you too. I'm good. Melissa Crivens. I live in Coos Bay, Oregon. I am a practicing attorney, and I was an elected Coos County Commissioner for 10 years until 2002. I'm also currently Chief Judge for the Coquille Tribe. And I don't know that it was my favorite concert, but my parents' favorite concert story about me is I won tickets on the radio when I was a senior in high school for Fleetwood Mac in Portland. And I actually skipped my senior awards ceremony to go. So they were not happy.
That was a good decision, Melissa.
I thought it was too.
Was it worth it?
It totally was for me. My dad actually had to get on stage and get my awards. So he was not happy at all. But I had a great time.
That's beautiful. All right. Thank you, Melissa, for kicking us off. I believe that means Mike, then Haley. No, sorry. Hijkl. That would be Peter Hayes next, and then Mike, and then we'll go to Haley.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see you, even if you're in a box, two-dimensional. And I look forward to meeting in person. And a few tidbits. So my family and I look after forests in the North Coast Range. Our family's been at it since about 1840, which doesn't account for anything. I have a number of connections to the state forests. For 40 years, we've been direct neighbors to the Tillamook State Forest. And as a member of the Board of Forestry from 2008 to 2012, I was involved in decisions that were significant in shaping the path of the Elliott. And I was interested before, and I continue to have followed it actively since then. And I think one thing with being a neighbor to the state forest that makes this project so exciting to me is I've been involved in state forest policy decisions in a circumstance where there are all sorts of constraints that really limit the scope of what a state forest can be. And so I think where we're going with this project, certainly there are constraints and things we need to work with, but it really opens huge possibilities to reimagine what a thriving community useful state forest could be. So I'm super excited about that. And my tidbit is that two of my great grandfathers were run over by trains, and one of them lived to tell the tale and the other one didn't.
Wow. Okay, more to come over drinks and dinner or something.
Yeah, what was that, like a family bet or something, Peter, that you had to prove your manhood by standing in front of a train? Was that it?
One of them was walking home for lunch and he didn't survive. The other one was actually had double tracked the Great Northern through the Rockies and he went in to survey the tunnel in the middle of winter, and he checked on the train schedule, and there was no train coming, and he got in the middle of the tunnel and the train came. So he rolled himself up in his buffalo skin coat and lay down between the tracks and wondered if the cow catchers were on or off, because if they were on, he was a goner, but they hadn't put the cow catchers on yet. So it went over the top of him and he came home and never told anybody for years. There you go.
Wow. Okay, that's helpful. I'm pretty sure. I mean, not to him, but to all of us. Thank you, Peter. Well, let's go to Mike.
All right, I'm Mike Kennedy. I'm currently the Natural Resource Director for the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. I've worked here for 37 years, and in 5 weeks, I will no longer be working here as I plan to retire. Little tidbit, I'm finding that when you apply for Medicare, if you were born outside the country, even if you were born to American parents, they require all sorts of crazy documentation to show that you are actually a citizen, even though I've been a citizen all my life. So, and then let's see, as far as concerts, probably my best one was Charlie Daniels, seeing them in person.
Wow, what year was that, do you figure, Mike?
I'm not sure I want to say. It's been
All right. Well, that adds another twist to walking into retirement. Another thing to deal with on the paperwork front. Good luck on that front. I know you all have done the forms. You've all done the background checks. You've all done the paper. I don't think we're going to throw any additional paperwork at you, although a reserve, potentially Government Ethics Commission training. We'll talk about that a bit later, but yeah, thank you all for bearing with the process. And speaking of paperwork, just helping us move through it properly. And then thanks to all the DSL staff for work on that too, Jimmy and Linda and others. Let's go to Haley next, followed by Bob Salinger.
Hi, my name is Haley Lutz, and I live between Coos Bay and Reedsport area, but work in Coos Bay. I have a background in environmental kind of law and watershed council work. I have a master's of studies environmental law from Lewis and Clark Law School. I got an intern for NOAA working on the coastal coho recovery plan when it was being established, and I have worked on a watershed council on the North Coast, leading a smaller watershed council, and now I'm executive director for the Coos Watershed Association here in Coos Bay. And so I am just a really big proponent of bringing folks together at the same table to move things forward. Specifically, I have a lot of interest in aquatics and ESA listed coho and other aquatic species, but just making sure we have healthy river systems and bays and healthy populations of fish. And I think that the best way to do that is to bring environmental and economic and timber and fishing and all of those interests together to find common ground. So I'm excited to do that in the Elliott. The Elliott is a critical part of our watershed. Our organization has invested over 10 million in it over the years. And so just really vested in this. And as a local, it's a place where I archery hunt with my husband and like to take my 3-year-old out to go hiking. So it's just it's an important area and I'm excited to be here. Gosh, an interesting tidbit. I have very little free time, mostly negative free time, because as I mentioned, I have a 3-year-old. But when I get time to myself, I have a pottery wheel on my property and a little pottery studio, and I like to do wheel-thrown pottery.
All right. Good stuff. And I want to say thanks real quick to you, Haley, just for a month or so ago, Ryan and Keith and I engaged with Haley's board, the board of directors for the Watershed Association, and Haley facilitated setting that up and just making sure that we were doing better as an agency and engaging at the local community level. And there's a lot of it was really valuable, I thought. And then Haley, I know coming on to this board, well, Peter too, it's just been a real pleasure for me to get to know you better and Peter get reacquainted, and super happy that you all submitted interest forums and are engaging. And I think a lot of great things will come from it. So Haley, thanks. And I'm with you on the wheel. It's a great therapy when there's time. Okay, let's go Bob Salinger, and then we'll move into Keith last but not least, and then we'll go to our agenda and then get moving.
Hi, I'm Bob Salinger, and I've been involved with the Elliott now for probably about 15 years or so, through a wide range of different adventures, and was part of the group that DSL asked to serve as the collaborative group to put together the plan that we're now beginning to implement, and was on the board of directors that was appointed last year and then kind of disbanded when we went through this most recent round of changes, and I'm really happy to be part of this one as well. I worked for a couple of different organizations. I did most of my early work on the Elliott for Portland Audubon, and more recently for Bird Conservation Oregon, which is a little nonprofit. And then I also worked for Willamette Riverkeeper as well. Living in Portland, but love the Elliott. And as far as concerts, let's see, favorite concert, I'll go with that question. How about the band at the Lone Star Cafe in New York? You're on mute, Brett.
Okay, there we go. Sorry, Bob. That sounds hard to beat. Back when they were all still there, still alive and together.
Robbie wasn't there, but Richard was still alive, but not to be alive for much longer. For only a few more weeks, actually.
Wow. All right. Well, let's go to Keith, and that takes me back to one memory, Bob. But I'll withhold for now.
Brett mentioned earlier that some of us have been in the same boat for a long time, and I was going to say that I think Bob and Mike and Melissa and I and Bill and Vicky and Brett, we've been in here in this boat since before there was steam power, I think. So, but it's been time well invested, and it's been actually a great, sometimes wildly frustrating, but a great joy all the same. Mike, you said you're just about to wrap up 37 years, right? This is I just finished my 43rd year as a teacher, and it'll be my last full year. I'm actually covering my daughter's classes when she takes maternity leave. She'll be teaching half-time. I'll cover her classes, which I taught for a million years, until she comes back in late November or early December, and then I will make my way out the door, and that will be sort of a symmetrical way to get out. I'm not ready, but it's time. You can only hang in one spot for so long. So, concerts, I managed to see Elvis in November of '76. He was in Eugene just a few months before he died. It was a lark. I bought 2 tickets. I think they were $6 each or some dang thing. And for my brother and I, he was going to graduate in a few months from high school. It was his graduation present. Ended up being a great story and really an amazing performance. Beyond that, the Moody Blues in Eugene was terrific. I've seen Buffett 7 or 8 times. Each of them was wonderful. And Jethro Tull, you guys remember Tull? I saw Tull back in the day as well. And 2 other things. One, you mentioned book. I read the same book every summer. It's a friend of mine that I taught with for a million years told me he read Lonesome Dove every summer, and I love the idea about revisiting friends. And so My favorite author is a Northwest author named Ivan Doig, who you may have read. Doig writes a lot about Montana topics. His first novel about Montana was one set in a small fictional town in the summer of 1939 called English Creek, and it's about a family's falling apart and trying to hold together, and upheaval and a forest fire, and it's an amazing story. And I probably read it. I read it when I was finishing my master's at OSU for the first time 40 years ago or so. So I probably read it in nearly every summer since. And I'm currently reading it. I absolutely love it. And I promised, some of you will remember that I promised that when we were actually a fully functioning board, the first beers at the Narrows Tavern in Glide, Oregon were on me. Seeing that we'll be unlikely to all get to the Narrows Tavern when we meet in September, if we can all pull it off afterwards, the first round, the first pitchers are certainly on me. I promise. Maybe the first two.
Well, more, it's a little incentive. Thank you, Keith. And thank you for, along with all of you, for just making time for this. Keith, I know you've had between a wedding and a memorial, a lot's been going on in your life. So just thanks, everybody. The summer is difficult. Thank you for finding this time and pulling together. I knew Bob was going to be a little, he was going to come in a little bit after the hour, the top of the hour. And then I know Melissa's got to duck out a little before 2. So we get it. And we have a little more runway in planning the September meeting, which we'll plan for in person on the South Coast. And so that additional runway will help us, I think, all hang together and be more intentional on the setup for that meeting. So here's the agenda, or at least the proposed agenda for today. I just wanted to run it by you all really quick. And getting back to Zoom again. I was a Zoom adherent, and then Teams took over my life through state work, and now back to Zoom. So the question here is, does anybody have, we need to get going on what we have planned for the agenda, but when you all looked at the agenda part of the materials in advance, does anybody have anything that they want to add or call out that's not on here? And then for some, I know some of you have contacted me about certain items in here and making sure we hit on certain bits of info within those items, and we will, and feel free to call it out within the agenda items. But does anybody have any additions, subtractions, points of concern? Okay. Well, so we're gonna dive into some work plan updates. And so the overview of the work plan is, all the things that are needed to get done to turn the Elliott into a working forest, or sorry, a working research forest, and moving it from the state forest into the Elliott State Research Forest. And I'll put a slide up while we're briefing, but this agenda item is a mix of updates to bring you all up to speed on where the key work plan components are in transforming the Elliott into a research forest, and then discussion around, we can discuss anything on anything you hear, obviously, but we've flagged a couple things on the agenda to make sure we discuss. So with that, I believe I'm going to stop sharing, and I believe Jean is on. And I wanted to thank everybody from DSL for making time today as well, and Linda for the setup. Jean and I are going to do a little tag team on this one, but Jean, if I could kick it out or turn it to you to kick off the update around the budget process.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jean Straight, and I'm the Deputy Director for Administration at Department of State Lands. And so budget is under me. So we are right now in this biennium, the 23-25 biennium, we are spending down the general fund that we received from the legislature during the short session. With that, Brett has been working on building the position descriptions for the staffing and getting those positions hired. We had to go through DAS on that, so it is a lengthy process to get all of those approved. And we are right now working on our 25-27 budget request, and we're working with the governor's office on the Elliott State Research Forest funding for next biennium. Our request was about 10 million is what we asked for. And we are, that budget request will be due September 1st. And we hopefully will have a little more to report to you in September with our discussions with the governor's office.
Thanks, Jean.
You're
And
welcome.
I'll round it out on the federal side of appropriations and requests. And then we can pause here and see if there are any questions, comments, or whatnot. So we received good news recently. Both Oregon Senate offices, so Senator Merkley and Senator Wyden, have included our federal spending requests for forest inventory, research, and recreational and educational planning, rounding out all that work, about a $3.5 million request, as well as further funding for Shutter Creek work, which is around a $5 million request. They've included both of those in the Senate Interior Appropriations Subcommittee bill. So this is a long way from the finish line, but still good news. The Senate Interior Appropriations Subcommittee still needs to go through the process of vetting amongst its members what funding requests make it through bill markup. And so we should know more by the end of July, and we'll be in touch with you all in the meantime about ways you could potentially be helpful in next steps. And then we'll have more information between now and September. So on budget, anything you heard or otherwise thinking about, any questions, comments? Okay.
Hey, I got a question.
Yeah, Bob.
Sorry, just looking for my question button. It looks like they moved the buttons around again. Yeah, so I'm just, can you dig down very briefly, just one more layer of detail on that state and federal request as to how that fits into just what happens in the next biennium and sort of its relationship to sort of the self-sustainability paradigm that we're also supposed to be operating in. If you can just give us a little more detail of how you see this kind of rounding out the next couple of years and whether this is part of the puzzle over the long term too, or whether this is kind of just this period.
Yeah, I'll take a stab and then see if Jean and Vicky have anything more to add, or Bill. And I see Chris is here too, Chris Costelli, and Chris has been really great in working the legislature for us, although I don't think he'll do that next session. But not for any bad reason, only good reasons. So the short of it, Bob, is, I mean, so and this is hopefully helpful to those who haven't been through the startup cost conversation before, maybe. So we know that we won't be generating, let me start with this. The Elliott's always had the self-sustaining principle, where the idea has been the research forest would be sustaining on its own feet. And once upon a time, that meant not invading tuition dollars or Oregon State. And at the state level, it means not going back to the legislature perpetually for funding support, or the Common School Fund for that matter. And that principle has been carried forward ever since the outset of the planning and the collaborative agreements in 2021 around the Elliott. And so there's a cost side, or there's an expense side to sustainability and financial viability, and there's an expense side, a revenue side. On the revenue side, what we know is whether it's through the sale of timber or carbon credits or other revenue tied to the forest, we're not going to be seeing any of that revenue for another couple of years. We've ballparked that at the end of 2027. And so we have a quote unquote startup gap, where what it's going to take to hire key personnel for program staff on the forest and pay ongoing costs related to roads, road maintenance, wildfire protection, and then move into new costs that we're going to be assuming in the near term related to monitoring the habitat conservation plan, and then doing all the things that it takes to keep to have an operational Elliott State Research Forest. We've put together these budgets that Gene mentioned, and been successful in 2023 and 2024 legislative sessions that are related to funding the startup cost gap. So what we're looking for in the 2025 to 2027 biennium is ideally the final piece in that startup cost investment from both the state end and then the federal end as well. We would likely, if Shutter Creek moves forward, and we'll get into that a bit more, but that's an if. It's going to be contingent upon future planning. But if it moves forward as the headquarters for the Elliott State Research Forest, there would likely be conversations about capital investments in the future going on down the line with the federal government and the state. But for our startup costs specific to the operations of the Elliott State Research Forest, this upcoming budget for the 2025 and 27 biennium with the state is intended to cover that and bridge the gap, to get us to the point that revenue would be coming in from other sources. And now I'll leave it at that, but other sources beyond that could certainly include grants, federal grants related to research, private philanthropy, and other sources. But back to the self-sustaining idea, we're trying to both craft the budget or expense side and the revenue side of budgeting and sustainability with the future in mind as to when we're actually going to see any money from timber, carbon, or other sources. So Bob, I don't know if that gets at it, but and Vicki, Gene, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. That's my attempt at a deeper dive.
That helped a lot, Brett. Thank you.
Okay. Here's the what I wanted to show really quick is this is the work plan slide. So these are basically all the key and this slide you may have seen before the land board before, with our comm staff and Elliott staff, including me. We're trying to normalize this slide with the land board and have this as our tracker for, here are the big dial items that need to happen before we can say the Elliott is officially a research forest. So our next item update here is on hiring in our management structure. And we've been busy on the DSL front, both in creating position descriptions to hire key program staff for the Elliott, as well as keeping things going on the contract end related to operations planning, getting ready for 2025, and contracts that we currently have in place tied to getting the forest management plan done, the habitat conservation plan done, and then ongoing road maintenance, fire protection, and the like. And what I thought we'd touch on really quick, and I see Jimmy Phillips is here, which is great. I don't know, Jimmy, are you game to talk a bit about the overall hiring process and the position description process, both kind of as a macro, how the process works, but also where we are, and Bill and I can kind of fill in around the edges if needed.
Sure, I can. Thank you for having me
and
here.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, so I'm Jimmy Phillips. I'm the HR manager for the agency, and my role with all of you will be limited once we get everything going. Eventually, we will have all of you placed in our Workday system, personnel system, and say you need any help navigating that. I will be your main liaison. But right now, I'm working with specifically Brett and Vicky to craft the position descriptions for the handful of positions that they are going to be requesting that does the work of the research for us. So right now, those PDs are getting crafted. And what ends up happening is once those PDs are crafted, I give a final review and I provide an analysis type of report on what I think the position is classified as. So many natural resource agencies, we have what you call a natural resource specialist, and they go to different levels and whatnot, following the state of Oregon classification system. The classification system also determines what their pay or compensation would be. So I'll do an analysis of that, confirm that the work that's detailed in the position description matches what we consider the classification. So once that happens, I go to the Department of Administrative Services, DAS, to get a final approval on that analysis. Ideally, they say, yes, Jimmy, you are right in every way. And we move, and they send me an approval memo. And then that's pretty much it on that front. And then Jean and her team continue on with the budget process to get, the financing for those positions. Once all of that is cleared, then we will work with the manager to hire those positions. And we will craft a recruitment report or whatnot to say what it looks like for outreach to hire those positions. And those, once we get them hired, then we do a traditional onboarding process for those employees and we bring them into the DSL fold. Did I touch on everything, the main highlights there, Brett? Okay.
Yeah.
And if any of you have questions on that, feel free to ask.
Yeah, and this is really, thank you for being here. This is helpful just to get all of you exposed to, who's behind the curtain in DSL doing things. And Jimmy, thank you for processing the background checks, but Jimmy makes the human resources side, along with other staff here, but flow. And so, thank you. Bill, do you have anything to add? And I think Vicky might. What I was going to say is, just to be clear, we're prioritizing hiring the policy and partnership coordinator position, the forester, the biologist, and the Elliott State Research Forest manager. And then we also intend to hire this year the executive assistant as well. But, Vicky, Bill, any color on kind of priorities as you see them before and I see Mike's got his hand up. Why don't we go to you, Vicky, Bill first, and then go to Mike.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I think you covered it well.
I will say that we've been pulling in position descriptions from other agencies as we've been looking at developing them. And the one that's in my bucket right now is the policy and partnership coordinator. I think the forester one and the biologist one are close to being done. I believe the forester and the manager position are, tell me, Brett, which ones are remind me if the board is going to weigh in on which one of those.
The manager position. And
okay.
Yeah, and then we're gonna dive into that in a second here. Yep.
Okay. Then I will tell you that right now the Elliott's under my purview and Bill's purview. But I think what Brett was alluding to a little bit ago is that as of September 1, we are creating a third deputy. We're doing it now, but I am putting someone in that position as of September 1. That third deputy will be the land management division because there's too much work for our agency for only 2 deputies. Jean does all the administration and Bill does everything else. So he can't do everything else anymore. So Chris Costelli, who's on the line and has been our government relations manager for some time, and also prior to that, one of our operations manager, and prior to that, lots of things. He's been with us for 20 years. I'm putting Chris in the deputy position, the land management deputy position. So he will be taking over responsibility from the department's point of view for the Elliott. And then, of course, there'll be a forest manager and others. But it's become too much of a burden for me as the director and the director incoming, because I'm retiring next July. The Elliott is just a huge piece. And there's a lot to do as director of an agency that some of it is really hard for me to get done. I'm working long nights and weekends because the Elliott takes up a lot of time. So that's how that will be managed beginning September 1. So Brett, do you want to, I think you mentioned what we were going to hire first and who the board was going to hire. Okay, got it.
Yeah, and let's go to Mike and then Peter, and then we'll come to the Elliott State Research Forest Manager position description. So yeah, Mike.
Yeah, so I just had a question for Jimmy. You described the process. How long does that process generally take from the time you get you're satisfied with the position description and you actually get somebody on board? What's realistically, how long does that take?
That depends. So I've already been perusing some of the PDs that I've already come across. It probably takes a good couple of days. And so what happens is I'll look at the PD and then I'll go to Brett or Vicky, and I might have a couple of questions about, hey, how does this fit with our organizational structure? I might ask more specific things around the work. And so then once I get those questions, I'll do that, complete my analysis, and submit to DAS. DAS is the wild card here. It could take a couple of weeks in the form of 2 weeks to get an approval, or it could take 6 weeks to 8 weeks to get an approval. DAS is doing this same process for all of the state government agencies. And you can only imagine some of the larger agencies. I might be turning in 30 per year, but there are other agencies that might get over 100 per year. And so they literally just put them all in a pool. So generally when I feel they're satisfactory, I try to get them to them individually as soon as possible. Right now, they're taking about a month to get an approval. Once we get that approval, or if I can get sort of a, hey guys, do you think this is going to work? And they might say, yeah, you can go ahead and recruit for that position. It's rare, but sometimes it does happen. Then I'll work with the recruiter, who's Tricarico Schwartz. We'll work with the manager or the hiring manager, or someone that will oversee the process. And then we'll go on decisions. How long do we want to post? Generally, that's 2 to 3 weeks. Then once you post, you have about, you condense all of your applicants to viable candidates to interview. That takes about a week or two. Do you want to have a second interview during that process to condense it even more? That's an option. And then ideally, you get the person hired into the position and they start working. So generally, from post to an offer, you're hoping for about 6 weeks. Mind you, 3 of that is just posting. So.
Thanks, Jimmy. Peter.
I have 2 quick questions. One is something that I assume is not possible, but looking at these positions, I assume that they're hierarchical. For instance, that the forester and the biologist report to the manager. So is there a strategy of staging these so that the person who will be overseeing things can be in place and actually have a hand in, for instance, the manager being able to have a hand in deciding who will be the forester and the biologist? And then the second question is, obviously all these are going to be key hires, and with a lot of these kinds of positions, particularly foresters, it's tough to get the kinds of people you really want. And a key to that is the longevity of the agency's commitment to them, which gets to the question of startup time and that kind of thing. So a question there is, how much work can we be guaranteeing them? Because I think that will play a role in who's going to be likely to take the risk of buying onto this adventure. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And I think the first question you hit is the big one. And I think in a perfect world, you would do it. I mean, an agency would do it by hiring the manager first and then everybody else later underneath that. And I think one thing we've wrestled with in deciding to not do it that way is there's since the shift to DSL management of the Elliott and with what's coming, with what's already there on forest management plan work and then operations to start in 2025, if we want to hit those marks and bring in capacity that's fairly critical to adding to what we already have to be able to operationalize the research forest. The thinking has been we need to hire sooner than later. So for example, the biologist will work directly on implementation of the habitat conservation plan and monitoring and compliance. We want that person to be familiar with the plan and ready to go as soon as possible once we get the plan. The forester is critical around the operations side of work happening in the near term in 2025 to 27. And Ryan is great. Ryan Singleton. Ryan's also our forester on our other lands. And so what we are looking to do there is make sure we have capacity to kind of get folks into the flow and going as soon as possible. And on the policy and partnership front, this is just where, we need to build out the partnerships more robustly that are going to be needed to make the forest successful, whether that's the research partnership world or local partners, including watershed councils and associations, or working with state and federal agencies on partnership. We have commitments in the HCP, for example, to engage in doing a bar owl management plan and getting it ready to go fairly quickly. And so we've felt like we need the capacity to work on the partnership and policy front and having that in place before the next session and before to add to what Ryan, Vicky, Bill, and I and others are doing felt pretty critical right now. So it is a little ass backwards from the way one normally might think of doing this, and I think it's a fair point. But the reasons why we've looked at it this way, and essentially it means whoever the manager of the forest is will be inheriting or staff will be coming together around the same point in time. It is different. So I think, if you all want to dive into that a bit more, or Vicky, Bill, others, if you have any color to add, I think you're hitting on something though that is it's not without some thought. But there's no easy way to go. If we wait, then we potentially saddle ourselves in a way that's uncomfortable.
Great, thank you. I assume that was the case. Just wanted to check.
Yeah, and then sorry, what was the second question? Can you repeat that one?
Question is, what's the span of startup funding? And I ask it here because it seems like people are going to be taking a risk on saying, for instance, they want to apply to be the forester. How much work can be guaranteed and how much uncertainty is there? Because I think that will play a role in who's going to be willing to give it a try or not.
Yeah, I'm going
Vicky
to
came off
answer
mute.
that.
Thanks, Vicky.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that one. And I think Mike Kennedy can also answer that, because Mike will tell you that he came on in his position many years ago, not as a permanent person, right, Mike? Isn't that right?
Actually, no, it was my first permanent position ever. I had been seasonal for years and years, so.
Yeah, and then you became permanent. Well, there's nothing that's a sure thing, and the Elliott is it's an 83,000 acre forest, and it's not going anywhere, and we're putting a lot of time and effort into it. So someone's just going to have to take a chance that we're going to continue to fund this position, and I think it's clear that we are on a path to do that.
Yeah, and in part we have, if we can start management we have a pathway around what the revenues are going to be, where they're going to be coming from. And so we don't anticipate having to have somebody on perpetual asks to the legislature, but you're right, like we will have to start somebody as an LD.
Well, and that's why we have hired Eric Farm to do an operations plan. Because I'm not going to sit and wait for things to happen. We need to get started on planning so that we can anticipate that harvest potential. We're also looking at the carbon, of course, but we need to plan for money to come in to make this self-sustaining. And Bob's going to tell you all about that too, because this has to be self-sustaining. And we ratcheted back the number of positions we were going to hire because it needed to be self-sustaining. And so we're right now pretty much at the minimum to get us started. And that's a good segue to you, Bob.
Thank you.
All right. Well, you stole the words out of my mouth, so I won't belabor it. But yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I do think it's important that we build over time as we get a sense of really what the possibilities are, and don't let the cost drive the harvest. I think that's what we're all trying to avoid. So just a couple of questions. One, just want to understand, so what Ryan's role will be going forward as we hire these positions, how he'll be intersecting with the Elliott, because I think Ryan's been a huge asset to this process and has been tracking it and understands it. So I just want to understand if he's going to still be involved or if this really means he's fading out. Number two, if you could dig down a little bit deeper on how the board here will also be intersecting with these hires and the processes, because I just think it is a unique beast. We have put it together collaboratively. I think for it to be successful, we need to maintain those kind of connections. And I think that starts from the hiring onward, really. I think if you bring in people that see and understand there really is this advisory board that plays a key role, and stakeholders and all of that, you get one kind of person, and if you don't, you get a different kind typically. So I just want to make sure that's really integrated in from the get-go.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear on the second question. And on the first one, I think whenever Bob Salinger is complimenting a forester, we should take note. And Ryan, I don't want to speak for you, so I'm going to ask you to come on if you're there. And I mean, our intention in talking through this, Bob, is Ryan he has played a key role and would continue to play a key role in moving forester staff onto the Elliott. And it's not I don't know if we have a clear date when Ryan, fades into other forest lands like Sasquatch somewhere. But, I think, Ryan, why don't you handle that question as to what you see as your kind of transition around all this?
Yeah, well, I think I'll be involved in this as long as necessary. So it really depends on the timing of who we get to step into the lead forester role. And there's definitely going to be some growing pains with that transition of knowledge and everything that goes on with the Elliott. So I'll just basically stay aboard as long as we need, as long as Vicky and Bill tell me I need to. I'll be here and involved until it's, I feel like we're in a position to where, all right, it's in good hands, you don't need me anymore, then great. But it's going to be one of those things where I'll be still taking questions and calls, 2, 3, 4 years from now, even as the transition goes on. So
Vicky, Bill, right answer?
Whatever the boss tells me to do, I'll do it.
That's absolutely the case. I mean, Ryan is going to be part of will remain part of the forestry expertise that we have here at the department, and we have other forest lands and timber related interactions outside of the Elliott, and that's where Ryan's focus will be in the long term, but obviously we'll be working with our new forester for that transition and as needed moving forward.
Haley, yeah.
Sorry, I spend like all day on Zoom and I can't find the new raise your hand, so apologies for that. But I just wanted to reiterate that I think, especially with the Elliott and how much transition has gone on and how much has been up in the air, it's really overwhelming for people who this forest is really important for. And I think Ryan's continuity, I think, is really critical because the community and the partners and everyone who interacts with the Elliott is, having to shift management again and build those new relationships. And the community and everybody is a part of onboarding is going to be a part of onboarding these new staff and getting folks up to speed and the local knowledge. So just from like a agency and budgeting perspective, I think it's really, really critical for that continued engagement and trust building and setting all the staff up for success that Ryan does have, time and capacity dedicated to kind of that transition with the community.
Hey, Hillary.
Thank you for-
Hillary, that's an inside joke, guys. So Ryan, I've been thinking about that all day. I was going to give that one up early, Ryan, so he won't let me forget it. So, hey, Hillary, Haley, if you go to the 3 dots at the bottom of the screen where it says more, and then you'll see where it says reactions, and that's where at least where everything is, the raised hand and everything is on mine.
Mine
Yeah.
is under chat now.
What's that?
Mine is under chat now.
Oh,
All right. Well, I'm gonna keep this moving.
Well, Brett, so I didn't hear an answer on the first part though. I heard you heard me, but I didn't hear really an answer in terms of how you're really going to engage this group with those hires and what the possibilities are there for us to really be engaged there. And then kind of maybe hitting the nail too many times, but we're talking about a pretty big transition here with almost sort of all the folks that have been involved on the staff side fading out at once and a whole lot of new people. And I understand Ryan's not going to fade out entirely. A whole bunch of new people coming in together that also haven't been synced up either. And I just want to put a cautionary note here. I understand the urgency. I agree with the urgency, but also we've taken 5 years to get to this point, and I don't want us to shortcut things on the next stages because it's taken so long to get to this point. A lot of work has gotten us here, and I think we just need to be very smart in terms of our sequencing and our engagement as we go into these kind of critical steps to actually start implementation. And I worry a little bit from what I'm hearing that there's kind of a sense of we just got to get it done. We've been at this so long, we have to push through these last things really quickly, but this sets the stage for the next 10 to 20 years. So.
Yeah, Bob, I hear you on that. The positions need to be hired because the money goes away at the end of June 30th, my retirement date. The money goes away, not because I'm going away, but because the legislature gave us general fund. And it goes away June 30. So we need to get people hired and spend the money on getting this forest ready to produce. So we can't wait around for those critical hires. And the partnership coordinator to me is a critical piece because they're going to help in finding grants and fundraising. That's Brett and I keep going to Washington, D.C. I don't have time for that. It's someone else needs to be pulling in and doing all those things.
Here's a suggestion, Bob, because I know we've got other things on the agenda to really dive into, but this is an important one. So my thought is, the oversight structure that the land board adopted says for the manager position, that's the one where we really need to work with the board. I don't think that is to say DSL doesn't want to talk to the board or hear from any of you with guidance similar to what Haley provided on like what you're thinking, the important next steps or qualities in those hires should be. There's a little bit of a, DSL's building program here. We've had underlying discussions with the advisory group since December of last year around how to structure a program. And so there's a little bit of a, trust us as we move forward, but you know how it goes with trust. It's, it needs to be tended. And so my thought is I could set up a between meeting Zoom between now and September, Zoom with you all to talk. I think for Peter Haley and any others to review the kind of organizational structure and the roles and duties that we've talked about with the advisory board at previous meetings, and how we're looking at the program at DSL, as well as what roles we're contracting out. But then draw some feedback in from you all around the key things you're looking for in the other positions as we move forward. And I don't want to get ahead of you, Vicky or Bill, but it strikes me that we're not putting our hands over our ears. So we just don't have a ton of time right now to dive in deep, but we could do something in the interim virtually.
I think that sounds great, Brett. I'd also ask that you consider on the interview process, having somebody, the chair of this group or whoever in that. I think that sends a really strong message, both internally at DSL and also to the people applying, that this is a little bit of a different look.
I agree with that, Bob.
Okay.
And that, I didn't mention that, but that was my plan.
Okay, that's great.
Even on these positions that the board doesn't have any hiring authority, I think that's great. So we'll be reaching out to you all when we get interviews. Well, we'll reach out to you when we get a list of people to choose from. And you can help us select those to interview, whoever wants to be on the interview panel. So
it also might be helpful in spreading the word of the position to places where it might be well received.
Yeah, good point.
When we get ready to post any of these, we will let you all know. We post it on social media and stuff too, but I think it's really important for you all to share with your networks. Here's a position. It would be great fun. Try it, apply. So yeah, absolutely. I have no objection to that,
Okay.
Bob.
That's great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And I'm going to take a stab at just keeping us going, watching the clock a little bit here. So on the Haley, what you said was great. It's like that kind of guidance on what you're thinking when you talked about Ryan's key role. We want to be hearing all this stuff from you as the board that guides direction of the forest. And so don't be silent between meetings. Just let us know, reach out through me, or if you want to talk directly with others here, be it Bill or Vicky, we can work on making sure these communications are happening between meetings. I wanted to ask about the big role, the Elliott State Research Forest Manager role, the position description that went out in the materials is intended for, we haven't released it and advertised it yet, but we do want to get your feedback on it as board members. And the feedback I've heard so far, clear feedback from some of you, was that position needs to be located on the South Coast near the forest. No wavering on that, even though DSL's building a team that will, have to get to know one another and get to know the agency as the manager. It's still critical to have that person on the South Coast. So the position description was updated to reflect that. But let me just open it up and let's spend a few minutes to see if anybody has any further input on this. And if you don't have it now, it's not, poof, opportunity evaporates. We want to get it soon before we start advertising positions. So
I was just going to tell you, Brett, thanks for making it very clear that this was a South Coast position. Thank you. And Vicky.
Thanks for making your input very clear. And Melissa. The South Coast will not suffer based on representation on this board. Is my feeling and hope. So what about the broader, how did anything strike you about our current, the current language, the current condition of that position description? Good, bad, or ugly?
I had a few questions, and I apologize if some of this is related to not completely understanding the interaction of the board and committees and various roles. But I think there's opportunity to tighten some of the language throughout it to make sure it's clear what role this person and position has in these various tasks. Just even like the second bullet in the duty section that it says provide vision and passion, you know, to those components, but are they like facilitating and leading that effort? I would just recommend making that really clear in the position description, because how it's written, it's clear that they're leading some of these things, but I wasn't sure what they were facilitating versus what would be facilitated by a different position. And then another comment I had towards the end, that second to last bullet, you say promote public engagement. I've given this feedback a lot, but I would recommend adding the word meaningful in there, to make it really clear that this is not a checkbox position, that you're looking for someone to lead kind of legal requirement engagement, but that a priority of this position is someone who is really vested in the relationship side of this work. I understand you're going to have a partnerships coordinator, which I think is really critical, and that person will be doing some of that as well. But I think you really need to get someone in this position who is up for the good, the bad, and the ugly with the relational piece of it. And then just one last comment in section B, the primary purpose of the position. That third bullet says support rural economies through active forest management, etc. I think it would be better to say to ensure that the Elliott supports that. It was a little like ethereal in how it's worded, but I think you want to make sure they're operationalizing those values within the operational and daily management of the Elliott.
Yeah. Okay.
And then just the last thing I had was 2 bullets under that. I think there's a lot of language in here about the tribal relations. I think adding the word, you know, you say seek and work to advance active partnerships, but I think what is most important there is like effective relationships with the tribe. It's making sure that there's that adequate and productive relationship, and that they're working together in a way that's respectful and engaging in that way. So that just seems stronger.
Okay, this is great. Thanks, Haley. I mean, is there anybody who would counter or disagree with anything Haley said? Because otherwise, what I'd like to do, Haley, is maybe just offline work with you on some of the refinements here.
Melissa has her hand up.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to see if
that or something else. Something else. Okay.
Something else.
All right, good. Thank you, Haley, and that all sounds good. It looks like to everybody. Yeah, Melissa.
Brett, you can probably guess what I'm going to bring up, but I notice, you know, and we've talked about this. This position is reviewed by the agency head. And I think I understand that's not in our board. That is not an authority that's been delegated to this board, right? Which is why it can't be different. But is there a way that we can have something in there that the board provides meaningful feedback, something more than a stakeholder?
Yeah, in the annual or whatever the periodic review is of the position's performance in the manager's position. Yeah. But I mean, I don't see Vicky, Bill,
yeah.
I don't see any reason, I guess, why not? What do you think?
No, I think it should be a 360 review. And that 360 review includes the board's input, as well as the stakeholders and tribes and everyone that's working with the forest. This is a big deal. This position is a big deal. So I wouldn't want it to be, oh, you come into my office and we talk about your what you did this year and what you need to do next year. That's not enough. It needs input from the board and everyone else that they're dealing with. So I would require a 360 review, but that's me, and I'm going away next July.
Right.
Melissa,
And
does that satisfy it, or are you looking for something
does-
maybe different?
it doesn't satisfy me.
Okay.
And maybe it satisfies the other board members, and I'm out of line on this one. So I'm happy to, say this is my opinion. And of course, the fact that Vicky is leaving next year makes me uncomfortable because the next head of DSL could choose a different route. So I would like to see something in writing about what the board's authority will be, because I feel like the board should be more than just another stakeholder on this. And with that, it will take my hand out. Thanks.
Yeah. Vicky, any reaction now, or take this and talk through it internally?
No, I'd like to hear what Bob has to say.
Okay.
I appreciate the comments.
Yeah.
I think on Melissa's issue, I'm in the same place as Melissa. I think anything we can do within the statutory limitations to really impress upon folks across the board, again, given all the changes that we're going to see very quickly, it's really important to try and articulate our place in space, and that we really do have standing, even if we don't have decision-making authority. I think for this to last, that's going to be really critical. And I think if it's not in there and emphasized, I think it disappears very, very quickly, especially when we get to hard decisions, or when the board is pushing back on something and it's kind of a pain in the butt and you'd rather make them go away. Suddenly becomes very easy to say, I don't see that in here, so we don't have to do it. So I'm in lockstep there. I may have this wrong, but I thought at the last time we discussed this, we were going to add a bullet to section B that got it sort of the conservation values. All this things in section A tier down to a bullet in section B, except for the conservation piece. It's kind of caught in the research, but so is everything else there too. So I don't know if you remember that, Brett, or you have notes from that, but I thought we got through that. I don't think it happened. Does that sound right?
Yeah, it does. And I'll circle back with you. I do recall. I think it was just an oversight.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks.
Keith.
Yeah, me. Yeah, I'm just saying ditto to what Melissa and Bob had to say about review of the forest manager. We've been for a long time. We thought that the board, or we've been consistently vocal that the board has management responsibility as much as possible. And while the structure doesn't give us as much as that was originally intended, and that's perfectly fine. I think especially on the most important hire, I think the board's voice it needs to be memorialized in some manner, because there's a time when Vicky's not around, and at least at the advise and consent level in some way, or more powerful language. So I'm exactly what Bob and Melissa said.
Okay, this is all a great and helpful input, and I don't mean to speed us along. Vicky looks like she's about to talk.
Well, I'm just wondering, if the board can meet and do their review with the forest manager and make recommendations to DSL. And then the DSL director then has a conversation with the board about those recommendations.
Yeah, I'm feeling like there are some solutions probably here, and we could
And
take the input, talk about it, and then come back in September with thoughts on what we would do for kind of tying off with you all.
And you do need to think about the future. We don't know who's going to take my role next July, and so I get it, I hear it. So let's come back in September with some thoughts.
Okay, great. And any further feedback on? I'm going to try to keep us moving on to the FMP soon, or forest management plan. Get out of acronym speak. Anything more on the position description? And if so, let's hear it. If not, please do send anything by email or phone call or whatever. This isn't a one and done conversation with y'all.
Yeah, one question for Vicky here, or for any of the DSL folks. So if down the line, 3 years from now, there's clearly a gap or a missing element into this position description, what's the process for updating and adding or amending?
To the
Um,
position description?
Yes,
Well, you can do that anytime.
we can.
Yeah, we haven't put it out there yet, so it's a live iterative
Oh, no,
document.
he means 3 years down the road.
Oh,
Done it.
We've got some experience and it's clear that this thing needs to be changed or added or amended. Does the board have the capacity to change the position description at that point?
Well, I think, Jimmy, we have the capacity to do that. So it seems like the board should be able to have input to the director and say, let's change this position description.
Perfect. Okay, that's all I wanted to know.
I'm
Thanks.
going to have Jimmy answer that.
Yeah, I would agree. So the board would collaborate with the land management deputy director on making changes to those PDs, and then that director will get to me those changes and we'll go from there.
Now,
all right.
we do that internally quite a bit with staff when we change up what they're doing.
As long as we're not really making wholesale changes to the scope of the work, we should be fine. But few edits here and there on different duties, that's generally not an issue.
Cool.
Thanks, Jimmy. And yeah, I think this is great. We're all going down this path together for the first time on building out the program here. So this won't be the last time we have a back and forth with, I mean, the intent is to have this kind of back and forth with the board so that DSL is getting your guidance. So this is great.
I had a quick question, Brett, just because the response to that was we can chat about it in September. Are you going to be flying this position before the September board meeting?
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Because
And I ask primarily as someone whose performance is evaluated by a board of directors, not everyone wants to sign up for that kind of position. And so I think it is important that this is resolved prior to flying it, because I think you want to be transparent with candidates about whether they're being, supervised and input is being provided by a board of directors versus a manager, because those are two really different sets of leadership.
Yeah, let me add, I guess, two things. One is, does anybody disagree with what Melissa, Bob, Keith, and I don't know, Haley, where you're landing on it, but does anybody disagree that there should be a board role in kind of the review of the manager position? And then the second question is, Vicky, I think if we're going to advertise the position, my sense is we want to tie this issue off, and we can do it. We can still do it with you all between this meeting in September. If we're going to float it before September, for example, we wouldn't want to do it without tying this off with you. And there are other means to getting that kind of guidance and input before September.
We can do it by email, and I agree. This is a critical position, so let's keep working on it, Brett.
Okay, yeah, but first question, does anybody have a contrary view? Or if we get working on options here, is that going to help satisfy the full board? Okay. All right, we'll do it. So I'm going to try to make up a little time. The HCP update is, I'll just keep it quick and then can do more by email or phone for those who want a deeper dive. Just let me know. The short of it is we've received feedback or responses from NOAA Fisheries and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to our revised final habitat conservation plan. And our technical contractor, ICF, is working on with us on our responses to the federal feedback. We haven't seen, I think the short of it is we haven't seen anything major in the sense that it shifts our timeline or what we were expecting to be kind of in the ballpark of what we'd be doing between now and the end of the year. And so our pathway is still continue to work with the federal agencies on tying off the environmental impact statement side of the work, as well as the final permitting process for the habitat conservation plan, and land it by December. or by the end of the year. That remains the intent and the path. So on the last part, before we shift to the forest management plan, we're also looking to work between now and the October land board meeting on additional Elliott Research Forest Board members. And Vicky mentioned a few areas where we feel like we're lacking and what the oversight structure calls for around the full complement of background experience and, you know, diverse experiences relevant to the operation of the Elliott State Research Forest. And I think Vicky mentioned forest operations or timber research and tribal. Do you all have any other areas or areas that you would want to highlight as being in particular absent on the board as we think about how to go about recruitment of candidates? See, Bob put his real hand up. Yeah, Bob.
All right. Yeah, it's easier than finding stuff on this new configuration. Yeah, I think there's recreation still. I think that the tribal really needs to be thought out in terms of how that intersects with also being a sovereign nation, having the government to government relationships, and then and I think it's something we all have to wrestle with in terms of whatever background we're coming from. But I think it's different too when there is a government to government relationship, and then that flows down to the board too. So I just think teasing that out as to how it all fits together.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that make sense at all? Or, you know, I because I think there's a different mechanism of input that I think it's been a little confusing sometimes.
Well, if I can respond to that, Bob, I think the tribal input has been really valuable on the advisory committee and the board. And then there's always space for government to government with the agency director and others that they would like to engage in. And that's never going to go away or change. So I'm not sure what you're thinking.
What I'm thinking is, I think how do you? We had a situation already where we had a tribal government change its position on the Elliott, and are we representing individual organizations, or are we committed to the vision of the Elliott, which is what we signed up for as board members? And so I think just getting clarity, I mean, maybe it's for all of us really, on how we deal with those changing dynamics within our universe. You know, are you committed to as a board member, or are you representing an entity, and in this case, a sovereign nation that has a very different mechanism for intersecting with the Elliott?
Yeah, and the intent has been, you know, there are not categories of seats on this board. It's, you know, to find individuals who represent the full complement of background, interests, and diversity, and to also, with respect to tribal sovereign governments, not treat tribes as sovereigns and keep the government to government avenues open, robust, and engaged, you know, beyond this board. And so I think there's a way to do both. And there's probably still, I think that the sense is there's still value given the interests in connecting the research forest with indigenous management and research in trying to figure out where we have pathways or rooms for room to come together, and potentially with anybody who wants to be on this board representing themselves, but kind of with their background and experience related to indigenous management or research on this board. I think we're through the forest management plan, frankly, we're trying to work out the bigger question I think you're getting at, which is where are the 5 Western Oregon tribes on the proposed research forest? And, you know, yeah, you're right. One tribe is not where it was back in 2022, but the value of the relationship and the conversation is still important.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong here, Brett. I mean, or Vicky, I'm not saying tribal involvement isn't important. I think it's very, very important. I think it's critical. I think it's been a foundational piece of what we've been discussing since the get-go. So I think, and I think representation on the board is important. So don't get me wrong on that. But what I was getting at, maybe put a finer point on it, was there was a lot of discussion over the last year about this wasn't formal consultation, or, you know, there was confusion about where the lines were in terms of what we were supposed to do, you know, what we were accomplishing through this mechanism versus the sovereign nation and those relationships.
Yeah.
And that became very blurry about a year ago. And that's all I'm trying to get at, is I think it just needs to be clear as to what represents formal consultation, what a board member's role is, to the degree to which they overlap or don't overlap, so that we're really making sure that we're connecting well along all of that continuum of relationships that the state has with tribes, and that we know what our roles and responsibilities are and where they begin and where they end, and where it might pick up in terms of a sovereign nation government to government relationship as well. Does that make sense? Or am I just
Yeah, that helps. No, that helps. I mean, it helps me anyway.
But absolutely, tribal involvement is critical. So,
Peter, were you reacting to that, or something other, and anybody else on that point?
I had an additional comment, unrelated.
Okay. Anybody else on the, before we go to that, anybody else on the tribal engagement front? I think, Bob, what you're clarifying the space.
Yeah. And I agree with what Bob was saying. And anybody that comes from a tribal organization that might be on the board, like Brett said, there are 5 Western Oregon tribes, so and no one could speak for all 5. And even as a staff member of a tribe, I can give my input, but if I was to get official position on something, I would have to go back to my tribal council, and in reality, that's where Vicky and staff would then have a government to government consultation with the tribe. I can bring forward ideas from the tribe, but I can't speak for the tribe, and that was one of the reasons I asked early on when they're soliciting for members on the board, that I could say that I'm retiring. I can't represent the Siletz tribe once I retire. So, but yeah, the government consultation is totally separate. But it'd be good to know where the board fits in that, like you said. So, well said.
Thanks, Mike. That helps. Thanks for lending your voice in there. Peter, other topic? Yeah,
I have 2 quick things, and I'm going to play the new kid card for all it's worth. And I know this has been discussed, that it seems like a challenge here is how to act in ways that truly inhabit and bring meaning to the word research in the research forest. And it strikes me that a really important thing is having people who are both practitioners of forest research and those of us who benefit from forest research is very important. And that I know there's a scientific advisory panel, but I think having people with concrete direct experience in forest research on the board, to me, seems appropriate and important, particularly with the uncertainty of the ongoing OSU relationship. And the second one would be a suggestion with the word timber. I think it's unnecessarily narrow and comes a certain bias, and maybe it's just me, but when I hear timber, I think of a load of logs going down the road on a truck. And there's a history in Oregon state government of forgetting that 40% of the private forest ownership is small family forest ownership. So often when you hear timber, it's let's go find the large corporate representatives. And I think that cuts out a lot of people, and that to realize the vision of this forest means certainly not ignoring the fact that logs are very important, but I think we're not talking about timber. I think we're talking about forestry. And forestry includes logs, but it includes a much wider range of things. So I think we should look to the future and, in a way, find a way to replace the word timber with something that's more accurate and broader and inclusive and welcoming. So I would suggest talking about forestry as opposed to timber. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that was just me saying timber, because I just got behind a log truck yesterday, big, beautiful logs. It was like, wow, I haven't seen one of those trucks in a while. Peter, you represent those family foresters. That's what I like about your position on the board. And so that's 40% of the forestry in Oregon is family forestry.
I don't have exact, but it's more than most people
Pretty
realize.
close. Yeah.
Yes, ballpark.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and does anybody, thank you, Peter, that's helpful. And I don't know that I'm scanning for, like, does that rub anybody the wrong way? Either of the points Peter made, both about research experience and forestry, foresters, forest products is broadly understood.
That was our third position. I forgot until Peter mentioned it, because we had Jack, who was a scientist and researcher, and we need someone like that on the board as well. That was the third. So I was thinking forestry, science, research, and tribal. Those were my three, unless somebody else has something different.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to move us into the forest management plan conversation, and then knowing we're short on time, what I'm thinking, Ryan, is we'll do a quick, I'll turn to you for after that, a quick hit on where we are with the operations plan, but that we come back in September with the deeper dive, probably with Eric Farm there as well, around the forest management plan, knowing that we're not putting anything out right now. We're not going to be putting anything out until after September in terms of a draft. So it seems like if we need to shift something around, that seems like the one. And why don't we just do it now? Ryan, does that sound, can you roll with that? And do you have any color to add on, just a quick hit on where we are with it? And then we'll take from there and dive into the forest management plan.
Yeah, yeah, and we did invite Eric, but I guess since we're gonna go real short, I'll just tell him we'll hold off until September for him to join. But I do want to bring up, I'll see if I can do this in like 3 minutes, but I do want to share my screen so the new folks can see what some of the elements are of an operations plan. So let's see if I can do that.
Yeah, and as you do that, Ryan, just so everybody on the board is aware, we are under contract with Farm Unlimited, who is Eric Farm's company out of Coos Bay, and Ryan and I, and Ryan's doing a lot of the legwork, are working with Eric's firm on developing the operations plan for the 2025 to 2027 biennium, and the or period of actually calendar, should make it clear, not biennium, but calendar year. And I guess the one thing to add before you go, Ryan, is the intent here is to work within the context of habitat conservation plan compliance, getting a forest management plan done, and having operations plan compliant with both the forest operation or forest management plan and the HCP, so that we're set up, ready to do work in the 2025 to 2027 period. And Eric's been a really valuable resource and somebody who knows the Elliott fairly well.
Yeah, so thanks, Brett. If you can see my screen, everyone see that all right? Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Maybe
yeah,
expand it a little if you can.
yeah, and Eric is he might just jump on here real quick with us. Let's see, I'll go like that. So hopefully that's large enough font you can at least get the idea here. So we're gonna have obviously the main part of this plan is gonna be the operations of what we're doing. We'll go through and we'll have sections on where we're going to do intensive treatments, extensive treatments, restoration thinning treatments, and then hopefully we will have some riparian thinning treatments as well. We'll have a little bit on forest roads, obviously forest road management, ongoing maintenance, as well as any new road construction or road improvements that will be part of the operations plan. Anything with young stand management, so this would be site prep burning, veg management, PCT, surveying, integrated pest management, and then there'll be some other, maybe some stuff if we do this. Probably all of these elements won't be part of every plan, so we have them as placeholders. But then we'll all go into recreation management, what there is there, any research and monitoring. Probably also as part of the HCP compliance. I think that'll come maybe a little bit later here. Indigenous knowledge and practices. And then we'll have a planning section, GIS. This might be more where we get into also HCP compliance with surveying, fish, wildlife. Any long-term harvest planning will go into this area, and then anything with ARC surveys or cultural resource needs. And then there's the HCP part. So we'll have definitely a section on HCP, and then governments and administration. A lot of what we have right now, we're using it as placeholders until the FMP gets a little bit further along, and we can pull in certain elements from the FMP that will go in here. But by and large, what you'll want to see in this plan is where we're going and what we're doing. And I think that's really what folks want to see out of the operations plan. And so it is a 2-year plan. And at this point in time, there was a pretty extensive initial office review with trying to determine our harvest units and where to go. And then also more recently, we've done quite a bit of field reconnaissance to kind of put the sort of operationalize those units and see what makes sense. We're not doing a shotgun approach. We're doing more of trying to cluster various units into, kind of group them. So we're not just spread out everywhere. I don't know where we're going to end up, but we probably have right now maybe around 20 different, kind of project areas throughout the forest. And again, just sort of narrowing it down, we got a pretty solid pool of stands, and we'll, again, continue to work on that and probably have a better update when we meet in September. And then between now and then, certainly any questions or comments, you can reach out to myself or Brett, and we'll see if we can address those.
Thanks, Brian. Vicky's got her hand up, and then I see Eric is on, and I wanted to at least, Eric, I'll come back to you. I just wanted to be sure everybody could meet you. Let's go to Vicky first.
Okay. Hi, Eric. Haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you. My question, and I know the answer, but not everyone else does. We are mapping out those harvest areas that will not impact the research that is going to be done on this forest at some point in time, correct?
Well, that was our original intent, was to go to the so-called flexible areas.
Right.
And that is not really possible to go ahead and meet some kind of really our short-term harvest goals, especially when we're talking about the intensive management. We're limited on the number of stands that are at least 60 years old as of 2025 is what we're looking at. And so we've had to, for flexibility purposes, we've had to go into the main part of the MRW, not just the flexibles. if we did just the flexibles, we'd have a really narrow amount of units that we could do. And I kind of think it would be hamstringing us. So at this point in time, we've got a pretty large pool, and it includes flexibles as well as the main part of the MRW. So that's changed a little bit since we had, really it's changed since OSU stepped aside. And so not that we're, it could still happen. They could come in and maybe, these units won't start being harvested probably for a while, at least at the earliest, it'd be late 2025 into 26 and 27 likely. So there still can be, if an agreement comes into play with OSU or whoever, you could still maybe get some pre-harvest plots in and whatever kind of data they want to collect prior to harvest. That's still a possibility. But if we just didn't want to limit ourselves.
Okay. All right, thanks.
So yeah, let's go to Keith. And again, actually, Keith, if you don't mind, if we can do this, the intent here, and Eric, sorry to do this to you because we're short on time. And so the decision's been to come back in September with a more robust update on the operations plan, knowing that we still won't have the draft out until later beyond that. But could you do a quick intro to yourself, or from yourself to the rest of the folks on the line here?
Sure. Well, good afternoon. My name's Eric Farm. I own Farm Unlimited. We're a forestry consulting company and based out of North Bend, Oregon, so down in Coos County. Been fairly involved with the process back during the advisory committee days, and after that worked for OSU for a little while doing their financial modeling, and then most recently working for Brett and Ryan on the operations plan. So we've got a staff of 4 here in our office, and we kind of specialize in on the ground projects. So trying to put together harvest units and silviculture projects. Thanks,
Eric. Yeah, and I think it helps just to get everybody who hasn't met Eric familiar with Eric, as we have meetings where Eric's face is likely to show up again. And then when you recognize his name on certain things you're reading, you can connect the face. And I'm sorry we're not going deeper today, but Keith is going to probably take us in the direction of, who knows, potentially deeper.
Yeah, I think at least one question. Ryan, you and I have spoke about this before, and I think we did it when we had dinner with Brett. But what would be the outside timeline or a predictable timeline for identifying which harvest units would be looked at first? And I think as we go into a legislative cycle, being able to say that we're anticipating revenue to the legislature, I think and that revenue looks like it's going to come in on or about this time. I think if we're making asks, then I think it's also it's probably to our advantage. In fact, I'm sure it is to be able to say, and we anticipate revenue at about this time. So if you were talking about early 2026, maybe late 25, so that would, I'm assuming then you're early in 25 or by late spring, you might be able to say these are stands or units that would work well for those early harvests.
Yeah, we're the plan would be so we're doing 2 years worth of harvests. The plan would be to sell half of that in 2025.
Okay.
And as part of this plan, Eric has developed a revenue spreadsheet, so we're going to be able to predict, but I think in pretty good certainty. Usually it's conservative, but we'll have a pretty good revenue prediction based on what we end up with our final set of units. And that, how we strategize which ones to pick to sell the first year versus the second year, we haven't really thought about that. What we want to do is provide a pool. And so when we get to 2025, we'll hopefully be in a position with new hires and everything else that we can go ahead and put a timber sale together and sell it in 25. When that timing actually happens, we don't know. We still need the ITP in hand and all that, but we should have a pretty good idea of revenue from this plan. Again, it just depends on the appetite of how much, well, do we have the staff and capacity to do a full year's worth right off the bat, or do we have to go in pretty slow? We've talked about maybe a slow rollout until we get our feet on the ground. And the other thing too is when you sell a sale, you do get upfront money, right? You get down payments, advance payments, and so you can set those contracts up to have periodic payments, even if they're not going to harvest for a couple of years. So these are all things that you can do once we have everything in place.
My target would be, if possible, that we have some level of prediction, and by the end of the legislative cycle next year. So they're going to walk out of Salem in June at some point, and it'd be nice if, because of our promise to the state to pay our own way as much as possible, right? That we could also approach legislators and say, and this is the plan, and this is the sales we're going to have, and this is where we'll begin to see revenue from those sales coming in. That's
and if we do want some more of like some short-term surety, we can also set up some of those as one-year contracts.
Okay.
So
I think it's important. Vicky can speak better to this than I can, but I think it makes sense for us to have some of that information to be able to lay out in front of legislators, so it's not just a
Pie in the sky.
Pie in the sky, right, and that's some of the feedback we've all got. So let's shoot for that if we can. And then number two, and then I guess this is a question for all. And OSU came up, and Vicky, it's been several months since I last spoke to Tom or to Shannon. Has anybody else had a conversation with them in the meantime? Brett, have you? And
we have a call on Wednesday this week, so we're in contact. And there's also and sorry, Keith, I'm just trying to make sure we save time for forest management plan conversation. So we'll get into on the operations plan. We'll get into these details in September more, and on OSU. There is there's more to say on this, but there's ongoing back and forth conversation. There will be over the course of the FMP period, and then there's actual work on their end to work with us on deploying some of the federal money they have for baseline monitoring. So that's been a positive development, and probably more to come in September on that too. And Vicky, let's go.
I just want to finish up the operations plan because we'll hear more in September. But Ryan, what's our schedule? When are we going to have that operations plan for approval of the land board?
So we will have it ready to go for approval by the end of the year.
Not October, but December.
Yeah, it'd be December. What we want to do is be able to wait till that FMP is finalized.
Yeah.
And then right after that, but we'll have everything in place and ready to go. And so it'll just be like, all right, we got everything we need to put into that plan. And then it's just a matter of doing, I think it's 30 days of public comment or review, whatever the process is.
Yeah.
And then have that thing. And then I guess, does the state land board need to actually approve it, or they just need to see it?
No, that's what I was going to jump in on, Vicky, is the land board doesn't need to approve the operations plan. This board, the Elliott board, needs to make recommendations to us on it, and we need, once we put a draft out and later this year, we need to have the public engagement process on that.
Yeah, it's the forest management plan that the land board's approving.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, great. I'm going to be quiet. We need to get moving.
Yes. So let's shift to the forest management plan. And Eric and Ryan, I'm sorry that we did this to you guys, but thank you for being prepared, and thank you in advance for being even more prepared come September.
Yeah, and no problem, Brett. And I'll probably bolt here a little bit early because I got to get over to Salem
Yeah.
for our public meeting tonight. So I'll hang on and just be on the phone. So if there's any
Okay.
questions for me.
Thanks. Yeah, and that's a perfect segue. So the forest management plan is out. Just to introduce this one, and then we want to hear from you all. Forest management plan draft, the Department of State Lands draft, is out for public comment right now. We have a public comment period that runs through July 28th. And we're having, this week is a full court press around public engagement. We have a meeting tonight in Salem, which is both virtual and in person, a meeting tomorrow in Coos Bay, and then 2 virtual meetings on Thursday. And the intent on our agenda today, and I guess broader, is to make sure that we're getting comments from the Elliott board around what you think about the draft, i.e. today. And it doesn't have to be everything today. Certainly, we're not expecting that, but we want to know where the members of the board are on the draft that we've proposed before the end of the comment period. And so, I'll follow up with phone calls and conversations, but the intent is to have a little conversation or get some input today from you all on that. And then come September, the process would be, after the public comment period is done, we analyze, digest what we've received from the public. There are ongoing conversations happening with state and federal agencies, as well as tribal governments separate from the public comment period. Those would extend, along with conversations with OSU, Keith, those would extend through, the period between now and October, when the land board would vote on the forest management plan. And come September at your meeting, what we would have for you there is a summary of what we heard from the comments that we've received, and the summary of where we are on other fronts too, and an ask in your role as board members for recommendations back to DSL on where we go in resolving the revisions to between draft and final proposed, but how we go about addressing some of what we've heard, public comments, and tying off a revised forest management plan for submission to the land board in October. So that's the intent, is to hear from you all what you're thinking now based on whatever you've been able to read, and then in the role of guidance and recommendations to DSL, have you in that role in September. And so expect a September meeting where the forest management plan is also a big component of the agenda, and we'll have more time there. But to pause here and get feedback before we go to public comment, there is a lot of great underlying work that we inherited and thankfully have and based our draft, the DSL draft FMP on, and that's from Oregon State and the process that it ran between 2022 and December of last year, when it submitted the OSU FMP to DSL. So that said, we have made some changes, and a lot of those changes, I think, are summarized in Chapter 4. There's a lot of content that remains as it was in the OSU FMP and direction there. And there's a lot where we just don't know. We don't know if OSU will be the research partner. And so the FMP describes the process, the role of the research partner in the process for submitting and approving research on the forest, while we play this conversation out with OSU and others. We also know that, and we've heard from various tribes, that tribes want longer and more time to talk about what tribal management or indigenous management and research could look like on the Elliott. And we want to give that time, along with recreation and education planning. Those are elements where we're anticipating, even though the FMP would adopt it by the board in October in some form, ideally, there would still be ongoing conversations around recreation education and then indigenous management that when they resolve or when they're at a point of being clearer or done, we would probably need to update the FMP and come back to do that. So it is a living document. It's intentional based on where we are in the process and the variety of values that we're looking to build into the research forest. And then some of the changes that we've made that you've maybe picked up on in chapter 4 and 6, especially in the draft FMP, are related to carbon and biodiversity management. So there would be an intentional voluntary carbon project on the forest. It ties to broader state objectives and plans and policies around climate and carbon. There would also be the desire to move to longer term or longer rotations, even in the intensives, to address carbon and biodiversity. That, you know, if there's research proposed that would require shorter rotations around the 60-year mark for research or financial reasons, DSL on the board would have flexibility to do that. But the broader intent is to do demonstrations and learn and produce longer rotation forest products, including carbon, but also wood. And then the other, I think, key points to maybe mention really quick, and then I'll shut up and want to turn to you all, is, you know, the biodiversity front is not just late old seral or old growth species. It's the complexity of habitat that comes from early seral as well. And some of what various science has noted is important to different species that are maybe not on the Endangered Species Act or covered under the Endangered Species Act, but culturally, socially important species. And so we've done some things in the draft FMP to promote that type of management with more flexibility than perhaps was in the, including a new management designation than what is in the OSU FMP. And so there's a lot to chew on. I don't know, this is our conversation to test out how much you've had to chew on or how much chewing you've done and what you think of it. So let's just open it up for as long as we can. And then what we'll need to do, I think, after this meeting is I'll do some follow-up calls for sure. And then we'll continue this conversation over the months ahead. But very curious about reactions so far. And Mike is thankfully broken the ice and volunteering to say something.
So I'm not sure if you'll thank me or not. So a question, obviously a lot of the requests for public input and all is occurring right now. And then you were saying you would be providing a summary of that in September with the idea of having having the land board approve the management plan in October. In September, would you be coming forward with what changes you would anticipate based on public input for this board to review? My concern is if you come in September and say, okay, this is what we heard from the public, what changes do you want right now? And now we're going to take it to the land board in October. I'm not sure that's enough time. And I understand the reason for wanting to get this in place. I'm just wondering how that would work in time for an October land board as opposed to maybe December. Time for changes and discussion on changes.
Yeah. So on the between July 28th and then essentially over the month of August, what we'd be prepping is the analysis and response to comments. And we'd share that with you all as a board prior to the September meeting for advanced reading. We'd also be working internally, and we have thankfully now technical support help through ICF on that front, to do some of that comment analysis work, as well as work with us on final formatting and polishing. But we would also come back to you with, here's what we're thinking as an agency around proposed resolution or responses to the comments and any changes from the draft. I mean, the draft is where we're proposing to go, but it is a draft, and we want to hear what people think, and we want to be open to where it lands. So yeah, Mike, the thought is that we would have time to get ready for September, provide you what we've heard, including, you know, from you all individually, and then have a document that is revised and teed up and ready for the land board's vote in October. It's not, you're right, it's going to come before we know it, but we've tracked it out on a planning timeline that we feel can be workable and responsive to the needs and the desire for public engagement.
Can you remind me what we've set for the date for our September meeting?
Yeah, we've got, let me switch the calendar. September let me look at my calendar while we
I think it's the 12th.
okay, and if somebody else has a question, feel free to jump in. Yep, the 12th. Thanks, Vicky.
And then information needs to be to the land board assistance for the land board packets by when? For October?
Shortly thereafter, final packets would be what, Vicky? How long before the land board meeting in October?
I'm sorry, guys, I had to lay down. I don't feel well. I have a chart of our expectations, but they usually get it a month before. Well, no, they don't get it a full month. They get it a couple of weeks before the land board meeting.
Yeah, why don't I do this, and because I want to get on the substance input from you all.
Send out.
Why don't I send out the schedule that we've worked up, Mike, and then honestly give your feedback on that. So aside from the process and the timeline, on the substance of what you've seen in the draft, Mike, did you have anything on that, or should I scan to see if anybody else wants to put their hand up?
I'm still working my way through it.
Yeah, it is shorter than the FMP draft or the OSU draft, but it's still a decent chunk of a document. Yeah, Peter, I think you came off mute.
Sure, I have two things I'll throw in. One is to acknowledge that a mountain of work has gone into this, and I'm really grateful, and I don't take that for granted at all. And my 2 points are whether there's a need to address what I see as a reality, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we're calling this a board, but if you look at its legal authority, it's actually an advisory board that's subsidiary to the land board. And I understand the history of how we got there, et cetera. And so I wonder whether in the draft, there's potential risks of actually calling it something it's not. You know, if it's an advisory board, why not call it an advisory board? And to me, this is tied to a larger issue, which is to really inhabit the vision of a research forest requires a level of commitment and long-term continuity that's way beyond what our normal political cycle is. And if we're going to really attract the kind of researchers and retrain them and the kind of financing that we need, it needs a sense of continuity that a true board would bring. And my concern is, I understand the history of why we are where we are, but do we aspire to actually eventually turn this into a true board? And the reason I think it matters is not like a power struggle. It's actually about how do we work with the realities of state government and the realities of research forest and create a foundation for that kind of continuity that we need. And my second point is there are many pieces here where questions of tribal involvement come up, and putting it out for general feedback is one, and I understand that how you get that from the tribes is very different. But my sense is that there are pieces in here that run directly into things that at least one of the tribes has already objected to, of having set aside preserved areas. Or, for instance, the language of co-management and co-stewardship. Obviously, that caught my attention, but there's not enough there to really help me understand what that really means. So I think we've got some real challenges here, how we navigate this challenge of having a need to get general feedback, but at the same time being aware that at the same time we're working at getting input from tribes, which comes in a different way. But how we feed those together seems like a wicked problem. And to not be creating expectations that, oh, the public says this, so it's going to change. But I think the tribes have a very important role here, that it's a challenge to figure out how we feed those together. So those are my two thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And on the first one, did you have an opinion on that? I mean, my sense is where you're relating is the continuity issue, and that the you know, having a true board is something that you would answer in the affirmative, like, yes, we need that.
I think we ought to, and actually, even if the circumstances aren't there to be there now, I think a lot of us understand that and support it. But I think if we're going to really realize the vision, we ought to have a commitment to say eventually we should achieve what that legislation was setting out to do. But also, I think societies do best when they tell themselves the truth. So to have a forest management plan that actually says something that appears to not be true, I think doesn't do well for us building the kind of trust and credibility with the Oregonians that we need to. But the rest of you know much more about this than I do.
No, that's great feedback. Okay, Keith.
Yeah, I was just going to speak to, and I know Peter understands the history of how we've arrived at this point, but I think those of us who've been around, as you've guessed, have been pretty staunch advocates for the board having as much oversight and board-like power as possible, considering the constraints of the situation we're in. So we've going over the governance documents, and on this has been, we've labored over it and labored over words, individual words. I don't think we got down to punctuation marks, but words. And I think it's as good as we can do, considering where we are in terms of a DSL property, and unless there's a remedy for that, I think we've structured this over the I don't know how many thousands of hours we've put in collectively into creating a functioning board. So I really appreciate your comment. I really think that that's what we want. I'm not sure. I'll defer to Vicky but I'm not sure we can ever, under the current process, get any closer to being that type of board than we are. And I think we're living in the same zip code anyway right now. I think we are in essence pretty much a functioning board, or will be. I mean, as of today, we are, right? I mean, so thanks, but I just want to make sure that you understand, and I know you do, that those of us that are still here have really labored over that issue and trying to make sure that we're not simply a rubber stamp for any state agency, and we're not. And that was never the intent. I don't think that's where Vicky wanted us to go. I think so.
Yeah, I will tell you that you're a board, is as much as we can make you a board with our legal counsel, without statutory authority. You are a board as best you can be, and it's pretty darn good. And I agree with you. We're in the same zip code. So we've got the best we can get.
How about others before we go to public comment here?
Well, and I'll jump in here, Brett. On this issue, I would say it's a both and, actually. I think DSL has done a a very good job of trying to make us into a real participant in this and to really have a role. I also think that it would be good for us to actually be formally aboard in the future, because I do think there's a difference. I think there are statutory differences that you simply cannot overcome. And I think that role was the one that was always intended. And I think it would be good to think about getting back to that. So I'm just putting my thumb on the, yes, I think you're doing a good job. Yes, I think everything Keith said is true. And yes, I think we also should at some point seek to be a full board down the road. As far as the FMP goes, I've read through it now. I'm still digging through it. But I don't feel like right now I want to jump in on some of the things I'm thinking about yet. I want to digest them a little bit more. So I'm going to reserve my comments, but love to talk to you. And I'll share my comments with everyone when they're ready.
I would encourage that as just recognizing that you're all maybe still all digesting it.
And I dropped the schedule in the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. Thank you for that. And I'll send it out by email too, as a meeting follow-up. That was helpful.
Oh, and I wanted to say that while public comment is cut off on July 28th, tribal comments consultation will continue with the tribes. So that's not coming to an end on the 28th.
Yeah, and same with state and federal governments and agencies, as well as work with you all. That said, we would like to know as soon as possible where you are on the FMP, and comments certainly during the comment period are helpful. Even though we have the latitude to work with you as board members beyond the 28th and the intention to do that, but please don't be shy, and I'll do the same. I'll outreach to you all, but we do want to, if you want to put things in writing, please do, and get them into us. And if you don't want to reserve your time for September, that's fine as well. And I'll probably call in the in-between times to try to pry more and talk more about what we've put out there, engage reactions to it. So with that, we have at least two people, and I don't know if anybody else is on the line who may want to provide public comment at today's meeting. And so I want to shift to that before we go back to tying off this meeting with next steps. So I don't know, Peggy Lynch and Bob Zybeck, do you have anything for the public comment period? I see Peggy just came on. Hi, Peggy. Good to see you.
Thank you. So to the new members, I'm Peggy Lynch, League of Women Voters of Oregon, Natural Resources Coordinator, and I have been following the Elliott State Forest issue since it was still a state forest and before it became a research forest, and during all the discussions around whether we were going to sell it or not sell it. So, so I've been around for quite a while, and welcome and thank you for serving. This is a really important job, I believe, that you have, and it's important for all Oregonians. So I appreciate you being here and your expertise. Okay, so really quickly, the hiring list, Brett, you gave really quickly, but I didn't see it in the meeting materials. So I would sure like to have the list that you're planning on doing. That would be really helpful. And just for everybody else, because I follow the other natural resource agencies, I will tell you that it is really slow to get through the DAS work and then Jimmy's work for DSL. So please stay on it and make sure that it gets, things get moving as fast as they can. You finally said that the September date is the 12th. Do you have a place for that meeting? Because it's supposed to be.
I don't think we've firmed it up yet, Peggy, in terms of Coos Bay or Reedsport, but it'll be somewhere on the South Coast.
Okay.
And then through the Elliott notice list and website, but also the distribution list, we'll get that out as soon as we know.
Okay, thank you. And then the last thing is, and I'll echo Keith's comments about the timing for whether you're doing some harvest and whatever. The earlier in June that you can have some estimate that you actually are going to bring some money in would be really, really helpful for the budgeting situation, because otherwise legislators are going to ask, haven't, you know, we've spent all this money, where are you? Aren't you going to start harvesting? And so, although I'm not overly thrilled about all harvesting, but I still think that we do need to make sure that this is a sustainable situation, and we need to make sure that that's done. And by around the 1st of June is really, really important, rather than the end of June when this legislature has finished making their budget decisions. So thanks for all of your work, and I'll be quiet. And by the way, for Peter and Haley, I really do have that have been following this forever. You are more than welcome to contact me whenever, and I'd be happy to share history information, not lobbying. Thanks.
Thank you, Peggy. I know we have somebody else who's also been following this forever, and Bob, but Peggy, thank you for those comments. I thought they were really helpful. And before we move on, anything back to Peggy from any of you as board members?
I will say that we probably ought to give Peggy battle pay. I mean, she's been through the trenches with this the whole time too, as a civilian. So thanks for all your work, Peggy.
All right. Thank you, Peggy. And Bob Zybek, welcome.
Yep.
Good to see you.
Yep.
Do you
Hi, Brett.
have comments? I imagine, I'm just guessing. Do you have comments for us today?
Yeah, I got 2 questions, and I've got to say I've been working on the Elliott since 1987 with Jerry Phillips. So I'm going to claim seniority here. The 2 questions are, one, at the last meeting, Ryan mentioned that the HCP, which has been going on since 1996, has 9,000 polygons now. That was something Wayne Giese and I were fighting against 10 or 12 years ago. How many polygons do they have now? This has been going on forever. That's my first question. Then I got a quick second question.
Okay. I'll see if Ryan's in Cell Ranch. I know he's traveling over the mountains to get over to the west side here.
So can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay. Yeah, so Bob, we are working on addressing that. A lot of it is just really, it's a GIS exercise. And we're just trying to narrow down, all these little bits and pieces that got sliced and diced with different iterations of developing the HCP. It's not going to really affect anything, but what we're trying to do is just come up with a logical set of polygons with which to manage by. So yeah, it's just, all it is just a long, arduous GIS exercise. And that's pretty much it. But we'll be narrowing that down. I don't know, probably by the time we're done, it'll probably be a couple thousand polygons somewhere in there. But on
Okay, I think I heard that. We had, I think the lawsuit was against a plan with 16 polygons. Wayne and I put together 25. Then Oregon State put together 125, and now HCP's put together 9,000. The Elliott, when it burnt, was 1 polygon. So that's the one concern. The other one is the phrase indigenous knowledge. I'm very interested in how you plan on working with the Indians. I saw there's a lot of political opinions in the FMP that I'm not sure are appropriate, starting with principle 1. But exactly what is meant by indigenous knowledge? It's not defined. Some people use it genetically, as if is passed on through family members somehow. Other people use it as living memory, meaning indigenous isn't limited to a genetic population, but it's local knowledge. And a third one, which I've been promoting or lobbying for more than 10 years, is research. There has been no research done, despite numerous attempts, to look at the historical landscape from pre-white settlement. So I think that's a critical element that's missing. The plantations that are there are totally atypical and would be ideal to transform to some type of traditional pattern or wildlife habitat or something. But at this point, there's 40,000 acres of tree planting that cannot be transformed into any other environment unless it's a fiber manufacturing plant as was initially intended. So the definition of indigenous knowledge, the working with the tribe other than braiding Western science with indigenous knowledge needs to be defined. I mean, what the heck does that mean? So that's my other question.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Yeah, and I think what you're pointing out is definitions, a glossary of some kind, and then where you do have feelings that what the what the draft is proposing as being inappropriate, or I can't remember what you said, I would encourage, just please let us know. Please document them, write them down, get us in, or get them into us. And yeah, on the disturbance, there is the intention to understand the connection between the fire history on the Elliott that is being more and more documented, and I know you've worked on it, to the role of Aboriginal or Indigenous burning, and that is set out in chapter 12, I think. But to the extent it should be highlighted more, and you want that, please let us know through a comment. I guess the HCP didn't create the polygons. It was a set of GIS work behind it that, I mean, first off, there are 60, I believe, plus sub-watersheds on the Elliott. And so there are those natural sub-watershed boundary polygons. But the issue we ran into was not a HCP created this. It was the GIS, the challenges in working GIS layers that created it. So we're working through it. I don't believe it's anything more than it's a bit of work, but it's not I don't see it as something that's more than the technical work around GIS to do.
Well, it has been going for 28 years, and the fire section you have, I wrote in response to the 93 plan, a fire history of the Elliott that's a lot more detailed and useful for management purposes in 1993. So that's been 31 years you've had a document, and it's not even cited. Oregon State did not talk to the experts on the fire history. They used a tree ring study, and then they used a fire model, a 380-year fire cycle or something that was thoroughly disproven 30 years ago. That fire cycle is a waste of money, and to put it in the plan is kind of embarrassing, I would think. But the tree rings do not tell a fire history. Jerry Phillips and I developed a distinct fire history 30-some years ago, and why that's not even part of the literature review, I find a little bit concerning. That's not, literature review is science 101, and it wasn't very thorough, and the fire section suffers accordingly. And,
okay,
and I will put that in writing.
Yeah,
so
thank you.
On writing on those points.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, and sorry to make you do it again, but it would be helpful if you did. And that's why this is a draft and a process. We're not there yet. Okay. Anything more, Bob? And thank you. If not.
No, those are my main points, and I'll put in a detailed written response to the FMP. But those are my concerns. Okay,
thank you. Yeah, and thanks in advance for the comments and in writing too. And with that, I know we're at 2:30. I wanted to see if anybody else had anything for the good of the order. But first, the reminders. So we sent out the information to you all as board members around the Forest Management Plan listening sessions or public engagement sessions tonight. So tonight in Salem, 6 p.m. tonight, or tomorrow night in Coos Bay, and the one tonight is virtual as well. Tomorrow night's not virtual, it's in person, and then 2 virtual meetings on Thursday. And certainly please engage as you're interested, curious, or able. Please feel free to attend those. I think we'll record them regardless. And so for those of you that want to hear what others are saying, we'll have recordings. And then the September 12th Elliott Research Forest board meeting. I'll work with you all through follow-up on this on agenda crafting and creation, but we do intend to be in person, and then TBD on exactly where on the South Coast. And with that, I wanted to see if anybody had anything for the good of the order from the board, and then turn to Vicky for any closing meeting remarks. Well, from my end, thank you all for making this the official first meeting in the Elliott State Research Forest Board, and positive thoughts in advance, and thank you in advance for all of your work as we go down this path together. We're charting something new and different, and so it's great to have your commitment and your mind share in doing it. So I'm appreciative for one. And Vicky.
Yes, as am I. I did want to respond to Peggy. We will likely set that meeting up for Zoom because it's a public meeting, the September 12th. We just don't know where we're at yet. Okay. All right. Well, everyone, I gotta rest up for this evening. I'm not quite sure what's going on here, but I'm gonna take a little rest, and want to thank you all for your time today, as usual, because you are what makes this happen. Couldn't do it without you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. And see you next time, and talk to you in between.